The Vrokian people had once been powerful, respected across the galaxy, their technology and knowledge far ahead of most. They were a proud race, known for their wisdom and achievements. But that was before the war, a brutal conflict that left them weakened and vulnerable, caught between rival galactic factions. The war had drained their resources, destroyed their cities, and caused their once prosperous society to crumble. Now, abandoned by the galaxy they had once been a part of, the Vrokians found themselves struggling to survive on a dying planet. The planet's core was unstable, and their once advanced technology no longer worked as it should. Their great cities were in ruins, their people scattered and fearful. The leaders of the Vrokian race gathered in the remains of their capital, now nothing more than a crumbling shell of the mighty civilization it once was. Why has the galaxy abandoned us? Lizura, a brilliant scientist, stood before the council, her face marked with exhaustion and frustration. She was one of the few remaining scientists working on a solution to save their world. We called for help, but no one answered. The council was silent, each member weighed down by the reality that their people had been forgotten. The galaxy that had once feared their power had turned its back on them, leaving them to face extinction alone. The once proud Vrokian Empire was no more. Now, their only hope lay in finding a way to stabilize their planet before it was too late. Lizura's hands shook as she stared at the holographic map of their world. The core was rapidly decaying. If they didn't act soon, their planet would be swallowed by the very forces they had once controlled. Yet, with all their knowledge, none of the Vrokian leaders had an answer. They were running out of time, and the Vrokian race was on the brink of collapse. But in the darkest moments, hope can sometimes come from the most unexpected places. It was then that a message arrived. A signal from deep space, a human ship responding to the Vrokian distress call. The message was short, but it carried a spark of hope. The humans had heard their plea. Lizura was skeptical. Humans, she thought, were a primitive species. How could they possibly help? But as the transmission continued, her skepticism turned to curiosity. A human captain, Eric Donovan, was willing to lead an expedition to their world. He promised to help. At first, the Vrokian leaders were unsure. Could they really trust these strangers from a distant world? But as the message ended, they had no choice but to accept. Their only hope now lay in the hands of a race they had long overlooked. As the Vrokian Council prepared for the arrival of the human crew, Lizura could not shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. She had seen the galaxy abandon them, but perhaps the humans, simple, resourceful, and determined, were about to offer them a chance to rebuild. The days passed slowly as the Vrokians waited for the arrival of the human ship. It seemed impossible that a species so young and untested in the ways of the galaxy could offer them any real help. But the message had been clear. Captain Eric Donovan was coming, and with him, a team of humans willing to assist. Lizura stood at the observation deck, watching as the first human ship entered their planet's atmosphere. The sleek, metallic craft glided silently through the clouds, a sharp contrast to the dying, broken world beneath it. It was the first human ship to ever visit the Vrokian homeworld, and its arrival was both a symbol of hope and uncertainty. The human crew landed in the heart of what remained of the Vrokian capital. The streets were quiet, the buildings hollow shells, and the people watched from afar, unsure of what to expect. The humans disembarked, their steps careful and measured, as they took in the desolate scene before them. Captain Eric Donovan, a tall man with dark hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the ruins. Despite the devastation surrounding him, he remained calm, a quiet confidence radiating from him. He had led many missions before, but this one felt different. The fate of an entire alien race was in his hands. Lizura approached the humans, her steps hesitant. She had heard of humans, small, unremarkable beings, so different from the majestic Vrokians. She expected little from them, but she couldn't deny the small flicker of hope that stirred inside her. "Captain Donovan," Lizura began, her voice steady but cautious. "I am Lizura, one of the lead scientists here. I was the one who called for your help. Eric extended a hand, his grip firm but friendly. It's an honor to be here, Lizure, he said, his tone sincere. We came as soon as we received your message. We'll do everything we can to help. Lizure eyed him carefully. She had to admit there was something in his demeanor that made her think this human might be different from what she had imagined. Still, the Vrelkian leaders had long believed they were alone in the universe. Could they really place their trust in these strangers? We have a problem, Lizure continued. Our planet's core is destabilizing. Our technology is failing, and we don't have the resources to fix it. We've tried everything, but nothing works. Eric nodded, listening intently. We'll do our best, he replied. Let's assess the situation together. The humans quickly set up their equipment, working alongside the Vrelkian scientists. It was clear that the two races were very different, both in appearance and in the way they approached problems. The Vrelkians, with their sharp alien features, had advanced knowledge of the galaxy, but their technology was complicated and failing. The humans, though less advanced in some ways, were quick thinkers and highly adaptable, bringing a fresh perspective to the problem. As the two teams worked, something unexpected began to happen. The Vrelkians, who had once looked down on humans, began to respect their ingenuity. Eric and his crew had a way of finding solutions that the Vrelkians hadn't considered. They were resilient, resourceful, and determined, qualities that Lizure had not anticipated. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Vrelkian scientists allowed themselves to believe that salvation might be possible. Despite the differences between them, the humans were showing them that perhaps there was still hope. As the days passed, the Vrelkian and human teams worked side by side. At first, the atmosphere was tense. The Vrelkians were still unsure about the humans, and some of them questioned whether it was wise to rely on a species so young and untested. The humans, on the other hand, were doing their best to understand the alien technology and help where they could, but they knew it wouldn't be easy. Lizure, the lead scientist, was the first to step forward and truly cooperate with Captain Eric Donovan. She had been skeptical of the humans at first, dismissing them as primitive and not equipped to handle the complex problems they faced. But now, she couldn't ignore the fact that Eric's team was providing fresh ideas, and their willingness to work tirelessly alongside the Vrelkian scientists was starting to make a difference. We can't keep doing things the same way, Eric said one evening as they studied a holographic display of the planet's unstable core. Maybe we need to think outside the box. Lizure looked at the human captain, her eyes narrowed in thought. You want to try something different? She asked, not yet convinced. We have no other choice. If we stick with the old methods, your planet will fall apart before we can fix it. Lizure hesitated. She had been taught that their technology was the only answer, that nothing outside their own race's knowledge could help. But as she listened to Eric, she realized that he might be right. They were out of time, and maybe it was time to try something new. We'll need to combine our knowledge, Lizure said slowly, her voice soft but determined. Your people have the strength to make things work. Perhaps we can use your adaptability, and my team can provide the Vrelkian technology. Together, we might stand a chance. Eric nodded, glad that Lizure was starting to see the potential in working together. That's the plan. We can't waste any more time. The two teams began to work more closely, and slowly but surely, progress was made. The human engineers used their creativity to approach the Vrelkian technology from a fresh angle, finding new ways to stabilize the planet's core. The Vrelkian scientists, while still skeptical of the humans, began to trust them more. They saw that the humans weren't just here to take advantage of their desperation. They were here to help. But despite the growing cooperation, there were still challenges. A small group of Vrelkian council members, led by a man named Sereth, were outspoken in their distrust of the humans. They didn't believe the humans could truly understand their advanced technology or solve the problem. They wanted to handle the crisis on their own, without any outside interference. "You should not rely on these creatures," Sereth warned the council. "They are not our equals. They cannot save us." Lizura, who had been working closely with Eric, stood up in defense of the human team. "The humans are the only ones who have given us hope. We need their help, whether we like it or not." Sereth's eyes darkened, but he didn't respond. His distrust of the humans was strong, but Lizura's words made him pause. Could it be that the humans were the answer after all? Despite the opposition, the fragile alliance continued to grow. The teams worked long hours, and slowly the device to stabilize the planet began to take shape. Every success brought a new sense of hope, but also a new set of challenges. The more the Vrelkian and human teams worked together, the more they realized that their survival depended on this fragile alliance. They couldn't afford to let their differences tear them apart. Not now, not when the stakes were so high. As the days stretched on, the combined teams of humans and Vrelkians worked relentlessly toward the goal of stabilizing the planet. Every moment counted, but the weight of their task was undeniable. The Vrelkian core was deteriorating faster than they had anticipated, and without a solution, their entire world would collapse within weeks. Captain Eric Donovan remained a calm and steady presence in the midst of the mounting pressure. His leadership was becoming a beacon of hope for both the humans and the Vrelkians. Though the Vrelkian scientists were brilliant, it was the humans' creativity and out-of-the-box thinking that was proving to be the key to the problem. "Captain, we need to modify the core reactor's energy output," Eric suggested one afternoon, his eyes glued to a holographic display of the planet's energy flow. Lizura, who had been working side by side with Eric, looked up at him. She was no longer skeptical of him. His approach was different from anything she had ever considered, but it was working. The human method seemed less precise but more flexible, allowing for faster adjustments. The two races were learning from each other, and it was the first time in a long while that Lizura had felt a glimmer of real hope. "I agree," Lizura responded, her voice focused, but filled with a sense of urgency. "But we'll need to combine our energy systems with yours. The design of our reactor is based on Vrelkian principles, but maybe your technology can complement it in ways we haven't thought of." Eric nodded, understanding the challenge. They were all learning as they went. "Let's try something different. We need to use your reactor's energy and apply the human adaptive tech to balance the flow. If we can stabilize the energy influx, the core might hold long enough for us to finish the rest." The Vrelkian scientists, who had been watching the humans' progress with growing admiration, now gathered around, eager to see if this new approach would work. They had placed their trust in Eric and his team, and for the first time, the Vrelkian people were beginning to believe that they might be saved. As Eric and Lizura worked together to combine their technologies, an unexpected bond formed between them. It wasn't just the science that connected them, it was their shared sense of purpose. Both had once believed that their race's survival was a solitary journey, that they alone had to carry the weight of their future. But now, in this moment of crisis, they had found strength in each other. "We are nothing without cooperation," Lizura said, her eyes locking with Eric's. Eric smiled softly. "We're all in this together. No one race can save the galaxy alone." The Vrelkian team followed their lead, gathering their knowledge and skills to work alongside the humans in a focused, united effort. The tension between the two groups had not disappeared entirely, but it had lessened. Even Sereth, the once outspoken critic of the human alliance, was beginning to see the value in their presence. But there was still a long way to go. The core was an unstable beast, and despite their best efforts, the countdown was relentless. Every moment of delay could be catastrophic. Yet, in the middle of this desperate struggle, Eric Donovan's presence was a reminder that sometimes it only takes a single spark of hope to light the path forward. The humans were proving themselves to be more than just helpers. They were becoming essential. The unlikeliest of saviors, they had brought something to the table the Vrelkians had nearly forgotten. the belief that no problem was too big to solve when united. As the combined human and Vrolkian teams worked tirelessly, the sense of hope that had been building began to fade into uncertainty. Though progress was being made, the planet's core was still unstable, and every passing day felt like a race against time. Captain Eric Donovan and Lizura knew they couldn't afford mistakes, but they were not the only ones aware of the ticking clock. In the shadows, a small faction of Vrolkian leaders, led by a man named Sereth, had been quietly watching the humans' progress with growing suspicion. Sereth had never trusted humans, and as much as he had seen the value in their methods, he was unwilling to rely on them. The Vrolkian people had survived for centuries through their own strength and ingenuity, and in Sereth's mind, relying on the humans for their future was nothing short of betrayal. "We are not children," Sereth argued in a secret meeting with other council members. "We do not need these human outsiders to solve our problems. They will only weaken us further." One of his allies, a council member named Ilana, nodded in agreement. "The humans are nothing more than temporary help. Once this crisis is over, we can discard them and regain control of our destiny. But for now, we need to stop relying on them." Sereth's eyes narrowed as he spoke, his voice low but determined. "The core is failing because our systems are outdated. The humans are adapting too quickly, and we cannot let them continue to meddle in matters they do not understand." While the council debated in secret, the human and Vrolkian teams worked together in the open, unaware of the hidden opposition. Eric and Lizura spent long hours in the lab, refining their designs and testing their theories. Slowly, the device that could stabilize the planet's core began to take shape. The human engineers worked alongside the Vrolkian scientists, combining their knowledge in ways that neither side had thought possible. Lizura had come to trust Eric deeply. They shared a quiet understanding, knowing that their work together was the only chance the Vrolkian race had left. Yet even in the midst of this fragile cooperation, Lizura couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pressure was mounting, and the skepticism of the Vrolkian leadership was growing louder. One evening, as Eric and Lizura finalized their plan for the device, a sudden explosion shook the room. The entire lab was thrown into chaos, and alarms blared throughout the building. A group of Vrolkian soldiers burst through the doors, guns raised. Eric instinctively stepped in front of Lizura, his heart pounding. "What's going on?" Eric demanded, his voice steady despite the panic. Sereth, his face twisted with anger, stepped forward. "You will not complete this device," he spat. "The Vrolkian race will not owe its survival to humans. This is our responsibility, and you have gone too far." Lizura's heart sank. She had suspected that there was some resistance within her own people, but to see it unfold so dramatically was a shock. Sereth and his faction had sabotaged their efforts, hoping to stop the humans from completing the device. "You're making a mistake," Lizura said, her voice filled with frustration. "The humans are the reason we're still alive. If we don't work together, we'll all die." But Sereth's mind was already made up. "We will find our own way," he insisted, glaring at Eric. "We don't need your kind here." The soldiers moved closer, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though all hope was lost. But Eric refused to back down. He had come too far, and he would not let the actions of a few misguided Vrolkians jeopardize the future of their world. "You can try to stop us," Eric said firmly, "but we're finishing this, one way or another." In that moment, Lizura realized that the real battle was not just to save the planet. It was to prove that the alliance between humans and Vrolkians was the only way forward, and no matter how hard the enemies in their midst fought against it, they would not be stopped. The sabotage by Sereth's faction had thrown the Vrolkian and human teams into chaos. The explosion in the lab had caused serious damage, and the once cooperative atmosphere between the two species was now thick with tension and mistrust. Eric Donovan and Lizura stood together in the midst of the destruction, their faces filled with determination, but also fear. The sabotage had set them back days, maybe even weeks, and the window for saving the planet was closing fast. Lizura was angry, more than she had ever been. Her people, who had once been the proud rulers of the galaxy, were now tearing themselves apart from within. The betrayal was worse than she had imagined. She had believed in the Vrelkian Council, believed that their unity would lead them to salvation. But now, she wasn't so sure. Sereth and his followers had struck a blow not just to the mission, but to their people's future. "We can't let this stop us," Eric said, his voice calm but firm. "We've come too far. We can't let a few people destroy what we've worked for." Lizura nodded, trying to shake off the frustration building inside her. "But it's more than just a few people, Eric. They have influence, and they're not going to stop. They believe they can do this on their own, without the humans." "You know better than anyone that they're wrong," Eric replied. "They might not trust us, but they're wrong." Lizura knew he was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Her own people were divided. And now, even in their darkest hour, some of them wanted to fight against the very help they needed. The struggle for survival had become a battle not only against the planet's failing core, but also against their own pride. The sabotage had forced Eric and Lizura to make a difficult decision. They couldn't afford to wait for the Council to make up its mind. The device they had been working on, though damaged, was the only hope they had left. If they didn't complete it soon, there would be no planet to save. "We can't just let them win," Lizura said, her voice trembling with both anger and determination. "We have to finish what we started, even if it means doing it without their support." Eric turned to her, his eyes filled with resolve. "Then we'll do it ourselves." They gathered their teams, both human and Vrelkian, and began to work in secret. The sabotage had made them more cautious, but it had also brought them closer. The humans and the loyal Vrelkians worked tirelessly, determined not to let Sereth's faction destroy everything. The tensions between the two species had faded into the background as they focused on their shared goal. Despite the distrust and the betrayal, they were united by one thing: survival. As the days passed, the device began to take shape again. Every adjustment, every repair brought them closer to saving the planet. But time was still against them. The core continued to destabilize, and each passing hour was one step closer to disaster. Lizura couldn't help but wonder if the Vrelkian people, in their desperation to prove themselves, had forgotten what truly mattered. The strength to survive didn't lie in pride or independence. It lay in unity, in working together, even with those you least expected. Eric had shown her that. "We'll make it work," Eric said, looking at the progress they'd made. "We have to." And with that, the two of them pushed forward, despite the betrayal that hung over them, determined to finish what they had started. The time had come. The device, once a collection of ideas and broken plans, was finally taking shape. Eric and Lizura stood before it, their hands covered in grease and sweat, their eyes locked onto the intricate machinery that would hopefully save the Vrelkian planet. But the danger was far from over. The planet's core continued to deteriorate, each passing minute making the situation more desperate. Every second now felt like a countdown. Eric wiped his brow, glancing at Lizura, who looked just as exhausted but determined. Despite the challenges, despite the sabotage from within her own people, she was still standing beside him. Together, they had become more than just collaborators. They had become partners, sharing the weight of a planet's survival. "We're close," Eric said, his voice steady. "But we need to finish it now. If we don't, it'll be too late." Lizura nodded, her face a mixture of hope and concern. "The core is unstable. If we don't stabilize the energy flow, the planet will implode. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, will be gone." She looked over at the control panel where the final adjustments were being made. The device they had created together was their last hope. The combined Vrelkian and human technology could work, but only if every step was perfect. They couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. As the team worked quickly, the tension in the air grew heavier. There was no more time for second guesses. Every person in the room knew that the device had to work. The alternative was unimaginable. Outside the lab, Vrelkian soldiers moved cautiously, their presence a reminder of the bitter division within their own ranks. Sareth's faction still plotted in secret, hoping to regain control of their world. But Lizura knew there was no turning back. The device was ready, and the only thing left to do was to activate it. The energy flow is aligned. Eric called out, checking the readings on the screen. We just need to power it up. It's now or never. Lizura stepped forward, her fingers hovering over the activation switch. Her mind raced, wondering if she was truly ready for the consequences of this choice. The entire future of her people rested in this one moment. Her people, once so powerful, now stood on the brink of extinction, and the key to their survival was a human, Eric Donovan. But Lizura knew one thing with certainty. Eric had shown her that the strength to survive wasn't about pride or isolation. It was about trust, about working together despite their differences. It was about finding common ground in the most unexpected places. Taking a deep breath, Lizura pushed the button. The room filled with a sudden hum of energy as the device powered up. For a moment, it seemed as though the world stood still. The hum grew louder, the lights flickered, and then nothing. Eric and Lizura exchanged a quick, uncertain glance. Had they failed? Was this it? Then, slowly, the core's energy levels began to stabilize. The device was working. The planet was safe. We did it, Lizura whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Eric's smile was small, but filled with triumph. We did it together. But even as the two of them stood there, victorious, the reality of their situation remained clear. The countdown was over, and the planet had been saved. But the war within the Vrelkian people was far from finished. And as they looked at the device, they knew that this was only the beginning of the real fight. The fight to bring unity back to a broken world. The hum of the device slowly faded, leaving a strange silence in its wake. Eric and Lizura stood motionless, their eyes fixed on the screen in front of them. The core was stabilizing, the energy readings slowly evening out. The planet's heart, which had been on the verge of collapse, was finally holding steady. They had done it. Against all odds, they had saved the Vrelkian world. But as the relief settled in, Lizura couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of unease. The battle to save the planet had been won, but the war within her people was far from over. Sareth and his faction, though temporarily silenced, had not been defeated. The future of the Vrelkian race still hung in the balance. Eric turned to her, noticing the uncertainty in her eyes. We did it, he said softly, a reassuring smile on his face. Your people are safe. Lizura nodded, but her mind raced. Yes, but for how long? There are still those who want to undo everything we've worked for. Sareth and his group, they're not going to give up. Eric understood. We've bought your people time, but the real challenge will be rebuilding the trust between your people. That's where the real work begins. The two of them stood together, silently acknowledging the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about the device. It wasn't just about the core. It was about healing a fractured society. And that would take much more than technology. The next few days were a blur of celebrations and hard conversations. The Vrelkian people, grateful for their salvation, gathered in the city's newly repaired central hall. Their leaders, including Lizura, spoke to the people, promising a new era of unity. But there was no denying the undercurrent of division that still existed. Sareth and his followers had retreated into the shadows, their resentment simmering beneath the surface. They were not easily swayed, and Lizura knew that convincing them to accept the new reality would be a difficult task. Still, she refused to back down. The humans had proven that their future was worth fighting for, and that was a message she was determined to spread. Thank you, humans, the Vrelkian council leader, Orcs, said as he addressed the gathered crowd. Without your help, we would have perished. Our gratitude is boundless. You have shown us that there is strength in unity. Eric stood beside Lizira, a quiet smile on his face. The gratitude was evident in the crowd, but so were the lingering doubts. The Vrelkians, proud and independent, were not used to relying on outsiders. They would need time to adjust. Today is the beginning of a new chapter, Lizira said to the crowd, her voice filled with resolve. We must learn to work together, not just with the humans, but with each other. We must put aside our differences and rebuild what has been lost. The crowd was silent for a moment before a slow, reluctant applause began. It wasn't wholehearted, but it was something. The first step toward healing had been taken. Later that evening, as the stars twinkled above the city, Eric and Lizira found a quiet moment to themselves. The Vrelkian world was far from perfect, and the challenges ahead were immense. But in that moment, they shared a sense of peace, knowing they had given the Vrelkians a chance at survival. We've come a long way, Eric said, gazing out at the horizon. Lizira looked up at the stars, a hopeful smile crossing her face. Yes, we have. And now we can finally start the real work. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, both humans and Vrelkians could look ahead with hope. Together, they had done the impossible. Together, they had saved a planet. And together, they would rebuild. In the weeks that followed the stabilization of the Vrelkian planet, things slowly began to change. The skies, once filled with the heavy shadow of fear, now shimmered with the faint glow of hope. The Vrelkian people, despite their internal struggles, were starting to rebuild. New energy was flowing through the planet's core, and the people who had once lost all faith were now working alongside their human allies to restore their homes. Yet even as Lizira and Eric watched the progress unfold, they knew that the path ahead was not without its difficulties. The planet was safe for now, but it would take years, maybe even decades, before the Vrelkian society would fully heal from the scars of the past. The wounds caused by the war, the abandonment, and the internal divisions would take time to mend. But at least there was a new beginning. Everything is changing, but it's still fragile, Lizira said, her voice thoughtful as she stood beside Eric, watching the Vrelkian cities begin to come back to life. The once crumbling streets were now filled with people working together, rebuilding their homes and communities. I know, Eric replied. But you've done it, Lizira. You and your people have made it through the worst. Now it's up to them to decide what comes next. And with the right leadership, I think they'll make it. Lizira smiled at his words. She had come to rely on Eric more than she ever thought possible. The humans had not only saved her world, they had taught her something invaluable. Strength wasn't just in isolation or pride. It was in cooperation, in finding a way to work together for the greater good. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Lizira said, turning to Eric. I've never been in charge of something like this. There are still many who resist the idea of working with humans. They're afraid, and I don't blame them. We've been alone for so long, relying on our own. You've got this, Eric assured her. You've already proven that you're a leader. All you have to do now is keep believing in what you're doing, and trust in the people who are willing to follow you. Lizira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel as overwhelming as it had before. Maybe it was because she wasn't alone. Maybe it was because she knew the humans, and Eric would stand beside her, no matter what came next. Days later, the Vrelkian Council convened, and Lizira was prepared to speak. The council members, many of whom had once been skeptical of Eric and his crew, now looked at them with new eyes. The human presence was no longer seen as a weakness, but as an opportunity. As Lizira stood before them, she felt the weight of the moment. The planet was saved, but the real work of healing her people had only just begun. Today, we stand at a crossroads, she began, her voice steady and filled with purpose. We've survived the worst, but to move forward, we must accept that we cannot do it alone. Together with our human allies, we will rebuild, Not just our planet, but our future. Her words echoed through the hall, and for the first time, the room was filled with a sense of unity. The future of the Vrolkian race, uncertain as it was, had hope, and that hope came not just from their own strength, but from the lesson they had learned, the lesson that, sometimes, the greatest strength came from working together. Lizera looked to Eric, who stood quietly by her side. He had been her ally, her friend, and now her inspiration. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that with people like him by her side, anything was possible. Together, they had saved a planet, and together they would forge a future, one built on trust, unity, and the strength of shared purpose. Months passed since the device had stabilized the planet, and the Vrolkian world was slowly coming back to life. The skies were no longer covered with the heavy, ominous clouds that once hung over the planet. The streets, once empty and silent, now bustled with activity as Vrolkian workers rebuilt their cities. It wasn't easy, and the scars of their past still ran deep, but the future was beginning to look brighter. Lizera walked through the streets of the capital, watching as the people worked together. The faces that once held despair now reflected hope, and in some ways, it felt like a dream. She had fought so hard to get to this point, to save her world, and yet it felt as though the real battle was just beginning. It wasn't enough to fix the planet's core. They needed to fix the hearts of her people. Eric walked beside her, quietly observing the progress. They had become more than allies. They had become close friends. Through the trials of the past months, their bond had deepened. The way they worked together, the way they understood each other without words, it was a connection that had been forged in the fire of struggle. "I never thought we'd get this far," Lizera said, her voice filled with both awe and relief. "I thought the Vrolkian people were too broken to heal. But look at them now." Eric nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told you that your people had the strength to rebuild. They just needed the right spark." "I think you were the spark," Lizera said, turning to face him. "You and your crew. You gave us something we had lost, hope. And now we have to make sure we don't lose it again." Eric smiled at her words. "You're doing the hard work, Lizera. You're the one leading your people to a better future." Lizera paused, her gaze drifting across the city. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," she confessed. "I'm still learning how to lead. How do you guide a people who've been so divided for so long?" "You lead with honesty," Eric replied. "You show them that the future isn't just about survival. It's about working together, trusting one another. You're already doing that. You're showing them that the strength to survive isn't about going it alone. It's about uniting, no matter the odds." Lizera looked at him, her eyes soft with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you. Without the humans. We've proven something important here, haven't we? That even the most divided races can come together when they have a common goal." Eric nodded. "That's the beauty of what you've done. You've shown your people that they're not alone, that they can trust in something bigger than themselves. You've proven that no one is too small to make a difference." The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the streets. The city was alive with the sound of workers and families coming together, the foundation of a new world being laid with each passing day. Lizera looked up at the sky, a peaceful smile crossing her face. "We've done it, Eric. We've saved our world. And now we can build something better together." Eric's gaze followed hers, watching the future of the Vrolkian people unfold before them. Yes, together. In the distance, the Vrolkian ships, once a symbol of their power and pride, now stood as symbols of unity, their technology fused with human ingenuity. The journey ahead would be long, but with the lessons they had learned, the hope they had found, and the bonds they had forged, Lizera knew they were ready for whatever came next. The future of the Vrolkian race wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving together, with humanity by their side. And that was the greatest legacy they could leave behind.